Senator Murray.
Thank you, Chair Collins. Secretary Hegseth, your department received $150 billion last year in the Republicans' Big Beautiful Bill. It also received a record $839 billion for fiscal year 2026, more money than you asked for last year. Combined, that is a $1 trillion budget for the year, and as I already mentioned, your department has yet to spend half of the reconciliation funds. And despite that, you are here today asking for tens of billions of dollars more for things that you've already asked for in your FY27 request or that have nothing to do with Iran. This administration has tried to sell this as an emergency request, but it may be better understood as an attempt to skirt the normal appropriations process. Here are just a few of the things requested in this Iran supplemental. $800 million for the National Guard to patrol D.C. even longer. Over $1 billion for the Army to patrol the southern border, which is DHS's job.
What's up, guys? You're tuned into Dr. John. Hegseth admitted to unlawful acts and stormed out of a Senate hearing are false. No credible outlet has confirmed such events. He did face sharp, combative questioning and gave controversial answers, but he did not confess to illegal conduct or make a dramatic exit. The reality is far less explosive than the viral narrative suggests. So what we're going to do today is carefully separate the viral sensationalism from the actual reality. We're going to look at what Hegseth actually said, what he actually did, and what it really means about his views on military and civil authority. Because the truth is important, and understanding what actually happened matters more than getting swept up in clickbait narratives. Let me start by giving you the full picture of who Pete Hegseth is and why his Senate hearings were so controversial in the first place.
$900 million to support the administration's illegal boat strikes in the Caribbean. Over $18 billion for munitions, which you've already requested in your FY27 budget request. And $1.7 billion to pay for your decision to recruit more people than the services need, which was not contemplated by the FY26 funding bill Congress recently passed. Now, you've already submitted a reprogramming request on this that our subcommittee is considering now, which really underscores the point I made in my opening remarks that the problem is not a lack of money, but poor planning. So I'll be blunt. The truth is your request does not make a lot of sense. So let me ask you a simple question. Why exactly are billions of dollars more for the National Guard and this administration's illegal strikes in the Caribbean urgently needed for the Iran war?
Well, Senator, I wouldn't, of course, agree with your characterization, but why this kind of spending is needed is because of the gross negligence and neglect of the Biden administration inside our department. Ran it like a bureaucracy.
Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense in Trump's second term. That means he is in charge of the entire United States military. He makes major decisions about military policy. He advises the president on military matters. He has significant power and influence over how the most powerful military in the world is deployed and used. Hegseth has a background in both the military and in media. He served in the National Guard and was deployed overseas. He also spent years as a Fox News personality, which means he is comfortable on camera and used to defending controversial positions in public forums. Hegseth has been controversial for various statements and positions over the years. And when he was nominated to be Secretary of Defense, there was significant opposition from Democrats and some Republicans.
Abandoned our strength posture around the world, so we're having to reestablish deterrence. You mentioned the end strength numbers, and I will acknowledge that we are ahead of schedule on end strength in recruiting. 8,000 in the Navy, 6,000 in the Army, 4,000 in the Air Force. Because under President Trump, there's been record and historic over 30-year recruiting records inside our department since he won the election, because the American people didn't want to sign up for what Joe Biden was providing our military.
Let me
and they want to sign up for what President Trump is doing in his leadership. And so those are good problems to have that we need to fund and a reflection of momentum. And this budget will allow us to continue the kind of momentum that gets us ahead.
My point is that a lot of this request does not feel like an emergency. And let me move on. Secretary Hegseth, like most Americans, I've had a lot of trouble following this administration's contradictory statements about the war. On April 8th, you said, and I quote, Their missile program is functionally destroyed, launchers, production facilities, and existing stockpiles depleted and decimated and almost completely ineffective.
Senators wanted to vet Hegseth carefully. They wanted to understand his views on military conduct and civil authority. They wanted to know whether he would respect the limits on military power in domestic situations. They wanted to know if he understood the legal and constitutional constraints that prevent the military from being used as a domestic police force. So the Senate held hearings where they questioned Hegseth extensively about his positions and his record. The main controversy that emerged in these hearings was about whether Hegseth supports using military troops to handle domestic unrest. The main controversy was about whether he thinks troops can be deployed in American streets to deal with protesters. The main controversy was about whether he respects the limits on military power within the United States. These are serious questions because there are laws about using the military domestically. There are constitutional limits on military power.
Mr. Secretary, Iran has been firing at U.S. military bases in the region and its ships for the last week. How is it possible, if their capabilities were, quote, functionally destroyed 3 months earlier, as she claimed, for them to be doing this now?
Well, Senator, Iran is at the weakest point militarily it has ever been in the past decade. Certainly, maybe in 47 years, as they've gathered effectively a terror army. And that terror army was built to try to create conventional capabilities to defend against a pursuit of nuclear weapons, which meant thousands of ballistic missiles, many of which we have destroyed, others of which they have put inside facilities and hidden in underground facilities. And that's what terror regimes would do. So I acknowledge they still have capabilities, no doubt. But the amount of damage that we've done to them over the course of these series of operations has put them in the worst place they've ever been.
Okay, well, let me move on. On May 5th, you claimed that Iran doesn't control the strait, and you said that there was a, quote, powerful red, white, and blue dome over the strait. If that was true, how did Iran shrink ship traffic in the strait to a trickle again last week?
The military is not supposed to be used for routine law enforcement. The military is not supposed to police the streets of the United States. That's what domestic law enforcement is for. That's what police forces are for. That's what the National Guard can be for in limited circumstances under state control. But the federal military, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, those forces are for external threats and deployment overseas. Using federal troops for domestic law enforcement is legally and constitutionally problematic. That's why senators were concerned about Hegseth's views on this topic. Senator Alyssa Slotkin pressed Hegseth on this issue. She asked him about illegal orders. She asked whether Hegseth would follow orders to use troops against American protesters. She wanted to know if Hegseth respects the legal limits on military power domestically.
We pushed almost, I believe, between 400 and 500 million barrels of oil under the nose of Iran over the course of Project Freedom, which went underground, which I acknowledged after we did so covertly because it was more effective to do so quietly than to do so publicly. So we've been in control of moving traffic through there for quite some time. Will they retain the ability to recklessly shoot at commercial shipping? And that's what happened. We had a ceasefire, and then they shot at commercial shipping recklessly
also
as a state.
said at
That's
that
what changed
same press conference, and I'm going to quote you, you urged Iran to, quote, let innocent ships pass freely. These international waters belong to all nations, not to Iran to tax, toll, or control. Last week, President Trump said the U.S. would charge a 20% toll to each ship to pass through the state. So based on your opposition to tolls, did you talk to the president out of that idea, or did someone else?
Iran's not charging tolls, and they're shooting at ships right now.
But Trump said that he wanted to charge a 20% toll.
We have a blockade right now of all Iranian ships and Iranian ports, and it's effective.
My time is out.
And here's where it gets controversial. Hegseth answered that troops could temporarily detain protesters. He said troops could detain protesters in their own self-defense. He said troops could then hand detain protesters over to ICE for immigration processing. Think about what that means. Hegseth was saying federal troops could physically grab protesters, hold them, and then hand them to ICE. That raises serious questions about whether Hegseth understands or respects the legal limits on what troops can do domestically. That raises questions about whether he thinks troops can engage in activities that normally only law enforcement can do. That raises questions about whether he respects constitutional protections for Americans. So that was the controversy, that was the issue. Hegseth's answer was controversial because it suggested he might not fully respect the legal limits on military power domestically. But here's what viral videos were claiming. They were saying Hegseth admitted unlawful acts. They were saying he stormed out of the hearing. They were saying he lost control and couldn't handle the questioning. But that's not what happened. He stayed. He answered questions. He defended his answers. He was combative with some senators. He snapped back at Democratic senators who criticized him. But he did not break down. He did not admit he did anything illegal. He did not storm out. He finished his testimony. He completed the hearing process. So the viral version was sensationalized. The viral version exaggerated what happened. The real story is that Hegseth gave controversial answers about military deployment domestically. Not that he admitted to unlawful acts or stormed out in dramatic fashion. Let me walk you through what actually happened during those hearings because the details matter. Hegseth was grilled about multiple controversial topics. Senators asked him about his positions on women in the military. Hegseth has made statements suggesting he opposes women serving in combat roles. He has been criticized for his past statements about women in the military. Senators questioned him about this, and Hegseth defended his positions. He said he supports women in the military, but has concerns about certain roles. He was combative about this topic, too. He didn't back down. He stood by his positions even when senators pushed back. That's not an admission of wrongdoing. That's a man defending his positions even when they're controversial. There was also questioning about Hegseth's personal conduct and allegations against him. There have been allegations about his personal conduct, including questions about alcohol use. There have been allegations about misconduct. Hegseth has denied these allegations. Senators wanted to know about his past. They asked tough questions. Hegseth denied the allegations and defended himself. He said the allegations were not accurate. He didn't admit to anything. He pushed back on the allegations. The pattern was consistent. Hegseth was questioned about controversial topics. He gave answers that were often combative. He defended his positions. He did not admit to wrongdoing or unlawful acts. So let me break this down clearly for you. Number one, there is no verified reporting that Hegseth admitted to unlawful acts in a Senate hearing. That's viral sensationalism designed to get clicks and views. He gave controversial answers about military deployment domestically, but he didn't admit to illegal conduct. Number two, there is no verified reporting that Hegseth stormed out of a Senate hearing in dramatic fashion. He stayed through the hearings. He was combative with some senators, but he didn't make a dramatic exit. Number three, Hegseth's controversial answer about troops detaining protesters is concerning because it raises questions about whether he respects legal limits on military power domestically, but it's not the same as admitting to unlawful acts. It's an answer that suggests possible misunderstanding or disregard for legal limits, but it's not an admission. Number four, Hegseth's overall record in these hearings shows he's willing to be combative and defend controversial positions without backing down, but he's not breaking down or admitting to illegal conduct. Here's what you need to understand about Hegseth's Senate hearings and what they really revealed. The viral videos claiming Hegseth admitted unlawful acts and stormed out are sensationalized and not accurate. The reality is that Hegseth faced tough questioning about controversial positions and gave defensive and sometimes combative responses. His answer about troops detaining protesters is concerning because it raises questions about his understanding of legal limits on military power, but it's not an admission of illegal conduct. It's a controversial statement about what he thinks troops could do, but not an admission that he did something illegal. That's an important distinction. That's the real story. Now let's talk about why this matters beyond just the immediate controversy. Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense. He has tremendous power and influence over the military. He can influence how Trump uses military power. Trump has shown interest in using military force domestically in ways that many people find concerning. Trump has talked about deploying troops domestically. Trump has suggested military involvement in law enforcement. So Hegseth's views on whether troops can be used domestically are critically important. If Hegseth thinks troops can detain protesters and hand them to ICE, that's concerning for people who worry about military overreach. That's concerning for people who care about constitutional limits on government power. That's concerning because it suggests Hegseth might support military actions that many people think are illegal or unconstitutional. The real issue is not whether Hegseth admitted to something in a hearing. The real issue is whether Hegseth respects the legal and constitutional limits on military power domestically. That's what matters. That's what people should be concerned about. And here's the thing about these Senate hearings more generally. The Senate has a responsibility to vet Trump's nominees. The Senate has a responsibility to make sure Trump's cabinet members understand and will respect the law and the Constitution. The Senate questioning Hegseth about his views on military deployment domestically was appropriate. The Senate asking tough questions was proper oversight. The Senate hearing Hegseth's controversial answer about troop detention was valuable because it revealed his thinking on this important topic. The real value of these hearings is that they showed senators what Hegseth thinks about military power domestically. They showed that Hegseth might not fully respect the legal limits. They showed that there are real concerns about how Hegseth might advise Trump on military matters. That's the real story. That's what the hearings revealed. That's what people should be focusing on instead of viral sensationalism about admissions and dramatic exits. Now let's talk about what the viral sensationalism is doing to public understanding of these issues. When viral videos claim Hegseth admitted unlawful acts and stormed out, they're simplifying a complex issue. They're making it sound like there was a single dramatic moment that settled everything. But that's not how reality works. Reality is complicated. Hegseth gave controversial answers about military deployment domestically. He was questioned about his views on women in the military. He was questioned about past allegations. He defended his positions and was combative with some senators. That's the reality. It's not as simple as an admission and a storming out, but it's significant. It reveals things about Hegseth's thinking that people should know about. So when you see viral videos about Hegseth admitting unlawful acts or storming out of hearings, remember what actually happened. Remember that Hegseth appeared before the Senate. Remember that he was questioned about controversial topics. Remember that he gave defensive and sometimes combative responses. Remember that his answer about troops detaining protesters raised serious concerns about whether he understands legal limits on military power domestically. Remember that he did not make an on-record admission to illegal conduct. Remember that he did not storm out dramatically. Remember that the real issue is about Hegseth's views and whether he respects constitutional and legal limits on military power. That's the real story. That's what matters. That's what you should focus on. The viral sensationalism is just noise designed to get views and shares. The real story is about military power, constitutional limits, and whether Trump's Secretary of Defense respects those limits. That's what deserves your attention and concern. Let me add more context about the legal and constitutional issues at stake here, because this is really important for understanding what makes Hegseth's answers concerning. The Posse Comitatus Act is a federal law from 1878. It restricts the use of federal military troops for domestic law enforcement. The law says that the military generally cannot be used to enforce domestic laws or police civilians in the United States. There are very limited exceptions to this law. There are emergencies where military deployment domestically might be allowed, but generally speaking, the Posse Comitatus Act prevents the military from being used domestically for routine law enforcement. That's a constitutional principle and a legal principle that protects Americans from military overreach. That's a protection that prevents the military from becoming a police force. That's a protection that keeps the military focused on external threats and warfare rather than domestic policing. So when Hegseth talks about troops detaining protesters and handing them to ICE, that raises serious questions about whether Hegseth understands or respects the Posse Comitatus Act. That raises questions about whether Hegseth thinks the law should be ignored or changed. That raises questions about whether Hegseth would support Trump if Trump wanted to deploy troops domestically. Those are serious concerns. Those are constitutional concerns. Those are concerns about military power and civilian control of government. That's why senators were questioning Hegseth about this. That's why his answer was controversial. It's not because he admitted to something illegal. It's because his answer suggested he might not fully respect the legal limits on military power domestically. Now let's talk about why Trump might want someone like Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. Trump has shown interest in using military force in ways that concern legal scholars and constitutional experts. Trump has suggested deploying troops domestically. Trump has talked about using the military to carry out his policies. Trump wants loyalty from his cabinet members. Hegseth appears to be loyal to Trump. Hegseth appears willing to support Trump's military policies, even when they're controversial. That might be why Trump picked Hegseth. That might be why Trump values Hegseth's leadership. If Hegseth is willing to be flexible about the legal limits on military power, that could enable Trump to use the military in ways he wants to use it. That's a concern for people who care about constitutional limits on government power. That's a concern for people who worry about military overreach. That's a concern for people who want to maintain civilian control of the military and limits on its domestic deployment. Let me provide more specific details about what happened during Hegseth's confirmation hearings, because the details matter. Hegseth was grilled about multiple controversial topics. Senators asked him about his positions on women in the military. His statements about women serving in combat roles were controversial. Some people thought Hegseth opposed women in combat. Some thought his statements were sexist. Hegseth denied those characterizations. He said he supports women in the military but has concerns about some roles. Senators pressed him on this. Democratic senators were particularly critical. Hegseth defended his positions. He didn't back down. He didn't apologize. He stated his views clearly, even when senators disagreed strongly. That showed Hegseth is not someone who will easily change his positions under pressure. Senators also questioned Hegseth about past allegations. There have been allegations about his personal conduct, including questions about alcohol use. There have been allegations about misconduct. Hegseth denied these allegations. He said they were inaccurate. He defended his character. He said people who know him well support him. Senators wanted to know details about past incidents. Hegseth gave answers that satisfied Republicans, but Democratic senators remained skeptical. But Hegseth didn't break down or admit to anything. He maintained his position throughout the questioning. That's not an admission. That's a man defending himself against allegations. Then later, there was another contentious Senate hearing. Democratic senators grilled Hegseth again. Hegseth snapped back at Democratic senators who criticized him. He was combative. He showed frustration with the questioning. He pushed back hard against Democratic criticism. But Hegseth didn't storm out. He didn't lose control dramatically. He gave back as good as he got. He answered questions even when they were hostile. He maintained his composure even when angry. That's a Senate hearing. That's not an admission and a dramatic exit. That's political theater and contentious questioning and defensive answers. Now let's talk about Trump's statements on military deployment domestically, because that context matters for understanding why Hegseth's answers are concerning. Trump has made statements suggesting he wants to use the military domestically. Trump has talked about deploying troops to the southern border. Trump has suggested using military force to handle civil unrest. Trump has made comments about martial law. Trump has questioned the Posse Comitatus Act and whether it should limit his military options. Trump has expressed interest in having military options available for domestic situations. So Trump's Secretary of Defense, whoever it is, needs to understand the legal limits and also understand Trump's thinking about military deployment domestically. Hegseth's willingness to discuss troops detaining protesters might appeal to Trump. His flexibility about the legal limits might be attractive to Trump. His loyalty to Trump might make him willing to support controversial military policies. That combination of factors makes Hegseth concerning to people who care about constitutional limits on military power. Let's talk about what would actually happen if Trump tried to deploy troops domestically to handle protesters. If Trump ordered military troops to detain American protesters, that would likely violate the Posse Comitatus Act. That would likely violate the Constitution. That would be unconstitutional military deployment domestically. That would be a serious overreach of executive power. That would be a threat to civil liberties and democratic freedoms. Courts would probably rule against such deployment if challenged, but the question is whether Hegseth would recommend such a deployment or would he resist it? Would Hegseth tell Trump that the Posse Comitatus Act prevents what Trump wants to do? Would Hegseth explain the constitutional limits? Or would Hegseth tell Trump that it's possible to do it anyway? Would Hegseth find legal theories to justify it? Would Hegseth prioritize loyalty to Trump over constitutional limits? That's what concerns people about Hegseth's views and his possible willingness to stretch the law to support Trump's policies. So when you look at Hegseth's Senate hearings, the real issue is not whether he admitted something illegal. The real issue is what his answers and his positions reveal about whether he respects constitutional and legal limits on military power. The real issue is what his possible willingness to be flexible about the Posse Comitatus Act means for how Trump might use military power. The real issue is whether Hegseth would be a check on Trump's potentially unconstitutional use of the military or whether he would enable it. That's what matters. That's what people should care about. That's what makes his Senate testimony significant. Even though he didn't admit to unlawful acts or storm out dramatically, the significance is in what his answers revealed about his thinking and his possible willingness to support military overreach if Trump wanted it. That's the real story. Let me expand on the legal framework that makes all of this so important. The Posse Comitatus Act was passed after Reconstruction to prevent the military from being used as a domestic police force. It was a response to the abuses of military power during that era. It reflects a fundamental American value that the military should not be used against American citizens in domestic settings. It's a protection that separates military power from police power. It's a principle that keeps the military focused on defending the country from external threats rather than policing its own citizens. When a Secretary of Defense suggests that troops could detain protesters, they are suggesting a departure from that fundamental American principle. They are suggesting that the military could be used in ways that violate the spirit and the letter of the law. What makes Hegseth's statements particularly concerning is that he wasn't just speculating about hypothetical situations. He was answering specific questions about what troops could do. He was providing operational details about detention and transfer to ICE. He was thinking through the mechanics of how military troops could be used against American civilians. That suggests he has thought about this more than just theoretically. That suggests he has considered how it could actually work. And that raises serious questions about what he would do if Trump gave an order that pushed against or beyond the legal limits. Now, think about what it means to have a Secretary of Defense who has publicly suggested that troops can detain protesters. Think about what it means for Americans who participate in protests. Think about what it means for the right to assembly and the right to free speech. If military troops can be deployed to detain protesters, those rights become significantly more fragile. People might think twice about exercising their constitutional rights if they fear military detention. That's exactly the kind of chilling effect that the Posse Comitatus Act was designed to prevent. The law was meant to protect Americans from military intimidation and military policing. When a Secretary of Defense suggests that the military can be used in this way, they are eroding that protection. The response from senators during the hearings was also telling. Democratic senators were clearly alarmed by Hegseth's answers. They pressed him repeatedly on the legal limits. They asked pointed questions about the Constitution and the Posse Comitatus Act. They tried to get him to clarify or walk back his statements. But Hegseth didn't walk back anything. He defended his position. He insisted that his answer was accurate. He showed no sign that he understood why his answer was concerning to legal scholars and constitutional experts. That's not a reassuring response. That's a response that suggests he either doesn't understand the concerns or doesn't share them. Republican senators, by contrast, were less aggressive in their questioning. They seemed more interested in giving Hegseth a platform to explain his views rather than challenging them. They didn't press him on the legal limits the way Democrats did. They didn't demand that he clarify his understanding of the Posse Comitatus Act. They seemed content with his answers, which is concerning in its own right. If Republican senators don't see a problem with the Secretary of Defense suggesting that troops can detain protesters, that suggests a broader acceptance of military overreach within the party. So where does this leave us? The viral videos claiming that Hegseth admitted unlawful acts and stormed out of a Senate hearing are simply false. They are sensationalized clickbait designed to generate outrage and engagement. But the fact that the videos are false doesn't mean there's nothing to be concerned about. Hegseth's actual statements, the real things he actually said in those hearings, are concerning enough on their own. His suggestion that troops can detain protesters shows a disturbing willingness to use military power against American civilians. His refusal to walk back or clarify that statement suggests he stands by it. His overall combative demeanor in the hearings suggests he is not open to being checked or constrained. The real question is, what happens next? Hegseth is now the Secretary of Defense. He has been confirmed and he is in office. He will have a significant role in shaping military policy and advising the president. If Trump wants to deploy troops domestically, Hegseth will be a key voice in that decision. Will he push back and explain the legal limits, or will he find ways to justify the deployment? Will he protect the Posse Comitatus Act and the constitutional principles behind it, or will he be flexible in ways that enable military overreach? Those are the questions that should be at the center of this conversation. Not whether Hegseth admitted something or stormed out, but whether he will be a responsible steward of military power. Whether he will respect the limits that have protected American democracy for generations. Whether he will stand up to the president if necessary to protect the Constitution. That's what matters. That's what people should care about. The hearings revealed that Hegseth is willing to say controversial things. They revealed that he is combative and defensive. They revealed that he doesn't easily back down under pressure. But they didn't reveal an admission to illegal conduct. They didn't reveal a dramatic breakdown. They revealed something more subtle but equally important. They revealed a Secretary of Defense who may not fully understand or fully respect the legal limits on military power domestically. They revealed a man who might be willing to stretch the law to support the president's policies. And that's a significant concern for anyone who cares about constitutional limits on government power.